Lonely Comanche warrior found a white girl half frozen in the river. She was pregnant and whispered his name. Bitter Creek, Comanche territory, 1883. The wind dragged low across the plains like something wounded. Cold, steady, full of warning. It carried the smell of wood smoke, dry horse sweat, and the copper bite of distant blood, even though no blood had been spilled yet. The land surrounding Bitter Creek was bone-colored and brittle, blanketed in old snow that refused to melt. A silence hovered just beneath the sound of the wind, like a breath held too long. Dakota Blackbird crouched alone on a ridge above the town, wrapped in a worn buffalo hide. His face, stoic and still, bore the kind of expression that made men lie or turn their eyes. The wind tugged at the braids in his hair. His horse waited behind him in the scrub, quiet as a ghost. Below, Bitter Creek stirred with slow, familiar ugliness. He could hear the town before he could see it clearly. Wooden signs creaking on rusted chains, boots clunking on the frostbit boardwalk, voices rising and cracking like ice under pressure. Laughter echoed from the saloon, jagged and mean. A bottle shattered against the side of the jailhouse. A man shouted something about savages, and a second voice fired a pistol into the air like punctuation. Dakota didn't move. He hadn't been seen in Bitter Creek since his brother's blood stained the snow outside the blacksmith's barn, 5 winters ago. That day the sheriff had called it justice. That day Dakota had stopped believing justice had anything to do with white men's words. He stood slowly, adjusting the weight of the rifle slung across his shoulder. His eyes never left the crooked little town that sat in the valley like a scab. He didn't hate the place. Hatred required energy he didn't waste anymore. But he didn't forgive it either. The snare lines he'd set that morning held only one good rabbit. The other had been taken by something faster. The fur was scattered near the stones, still warm when he touched it. He knelt, fingers brushing the torn grass. Not coyote, not wolf. Something else had moved through. He turned toward the river. The snow deepened as he walked. It muffled sound, dulled the world. The trees thinned near the water's edge, where the cottonwoods leaned toward the current like old women whispering secrets. The smell hit him before the sight did, cold iron and wet cloth. The river looked like it was sleeping, but it wasn't. Beneath the ice, the current moved fast. It pulled slow things under and didn't give them back. And there, tangled in a clutch of broken reeds, was something too pale for driftwood. He approached with slow, deliberate steps. A body, face down, a tangle of wet blonde hair, fingers limp, dress spread like a flag under the surface. No shoes, no coat. She'd been in the water long enough for her skin to turn soft around the edges, but not long enough to take the life from her completely. Dakota dropped to one knee and rolled her gently onto her back. She gasped. Her eyes fluttered, lips trembling blue. She tried to speak but only exhaled steam. Then, her lips moved again. Dakota. He stared at her. The name wasn't common. He hadn't spoken it to anyone in years. Most white folks called him Dakota when they bothered to speak to him at all. But she, this woman, freezing and broken and barely breathing, had whispered the name his mother gave him. She coughed once, weakly, and then went still again. He should have walked away, carried on, let the river keep her secret. Instead, he lifted her out of the water. She lay beside his fire inside the stone shelter he'd carved from the hills 2 winters ago. It wasn't much. Dirt floor, low ceiling, just enough to break the wind. He had no spare clothes to offer, only the buffalo hide and a flannel shirt he hadn't worn in weeks. Her dress, torn and waterlogged, now hung drying on a stick by the fire. Steam rose off it, curling with the smell of old blood and river mud. Dakota watched her from across the fire. Her breathing was shallow but steady. Her hands were raw, as if she'd clawed at something, or someone. And beneath the layers of hide, the curve of her stomach rose unmistakably. She was pregnant. That complicated everything. He sat with his rifle over his knees, staring into the flames. She shifted once, murmured something he didn't catch. Then, silence again. He didn't sleep. Not because he was afraid of her, but because he wasn't. Just before dawn, he found something folded inside her skirt pocket. A scrap of cloth. No, paper. A photograph, soft from moisture, its corners beginning to rot. It showed 3 figures. A white man in preacher's robes. A woman with high cheekbones and dark eyes, Comanche. And behind them, nearly lost in the blur, a child. A boy. Him. He hadn't seen that face in years, but he knew it. The photo trembled in his fingers. Outside, a branch snapped under weight that didn't belong to the wind. He rose slowly, fingers closing around the rifle's worn grip. His eyes flicked to the fire, then to the woman's face, still as frost. Had someone followed her? Had someone sent her? And how in God's name did she know his name? The wind hadn't stopped, only lowered its voice. It moved like breath through the cracks of Dakota's stone shelter, slipping across the coals and brushing the woman's cheeks. Her skin no longer held that deathly pallor, but she was still far from well. Dakota watched her from the far side of the fire, arms crossed over his knees. The rifle sat between them, silent as ever. She hadn't moved since he laid her down, save for the twitch of her fingers when he adjusted the buffalo hide. But her chest rose and fell now, shallow, uncertain, alive. He hadn't spoken, not to her, not even to himself. There was something heavy about her presence, something too full for words. She had spoken his name, and it still echoed like thunder in a canyon. Dakota stirred the fire with a blackened stick. Sparks leapt up and danced against the stone ceiling. The crackle reminded him of musket fire, of the night the flames took his family's winter camp, and the bluecoats dragged his brother behind a rope for a mile. He clenched his jaw until it ached. The woman moaned. He looked up sharply. Her eyes fluttered, opened, glazed and confused. For a long moment she said nothing, just scanned the shadows, until they settled on his face. "Dakota," she whispered again, soft, more like remembering than speaking. He didn't respond. Her throat moved as she swallowed. "You saved me." His voice came out rough. "You shouldn't know my name." She tried to sit up and winced, holding her side. "I do." Her lips cracked as she spoke. He handed her the canteen and waited while she drank. Her fingers trembled. "You were smaller," she said, squinting at him. "But it's you." He said nothing. The fire popped between them. "Do you remember me?" she asked. He stared at her for a long while. "No." She looked down, then back at him. "My name is Mary Ann." Her voice carried something under it. Not fear, not pleading, but recognition. Dakota studied her. Pale hair matted, skin scratched and bruised. Her dress, now mostly dry, lay folded near the fire. Its seams were torn, buttons missing. Someone had tried to take something from her, or keep her from escaping. She noticed him looking and pulled the hide tighter around her. "I wasn't supposed to live," she said. Silence fell again. And in it, she reached under the buffalo skin and placed a hand on her belly. "I ran," she said, her voice quieter now. There was nowhere else to go. Nowhere safe. But I remembered a face, a boy, in the hills near the mission school. The only one who ever brought me food when I cried at night. A boy with a hawk feather in his braid. Dakota stared into the flames. That memory flickered like a shadow in his mind, almost too faint to grasp. He had lived at that mission for only a few months, before he ran back to his people before soldiers came and ended the story. She leaned forward slightly. "That was you, wasn't it?" He didn't answer, but something shifted in his posture. A muscle in his cheek tightened. "You're carrying a child," he said finally. Mary Ann nodded. "Whose is it?" Her eyes dropped. "Mine," she said softly, "but not his." Dakota's gaze sharpened. "Who?" Her voice wavered. "My husband." Reverend Elijah Graves. The name landed like a stone. Dakota knew that name. He'd heard it spoken in Bitter Creek with reverence and fear. the preacher who built a following with fire and brimstone, who claimed to know God's judgment better than any sheriff. He thinks I'm possessed, Marianne said bitterly. Because I left. Because I wouldn't lie beneath him after he touched me with blood still on his hands. Her hand trembled again over her belly. Dakota's voice was low. Is he coming? She nodded. I didn't mean to lead him to you, she said. I just wanted to disappear. Outside, a raven called sharply from the rocks. Dakota stood. She looked up at him, eyes searching. Will you send me back? He didn't answer. He walked to the edge of the shelter, rifle slung over his shoulder, eyes sweeping the canyon. The snow had stopped falling, but tracks would still be fresh. What are you going to do? She asked behind him. He didn't look back. His voice came like stone. Hide you. By nightfall, he'd moved her to a second shelter higher in the rocks, one few knew existed. He left her with a fire, water, and the pistol he rarely used. She held it like it burned her fingers, but nodded when he told her where to aim. When he returned to the riverbank, he found the trail. Horse tracks, deep, wide. 4 riders at least. One of the horses wore shoes that threw sparks, iron with a notch. He'd seen that kind of track before. On a horse that belonged to the Reverend Graves. He crouched and ran his fingers along the edge of a print. They were close. He stood slowly, eyes narrowing toward the dark ridgeline to the east. And in the trees beyond the clearing, something moved. Too smooth for wind, too still for deer. Dakota didn't reach for his rifle. He just listened. The snow held the footprints like a memory, frozen in perfect detail. 4 horses, one heavier than the others. Riders had stopped near the river, dismounted. One had walked to the edge, then turned back. The marks were fresh, less than a day. Dakota stood still beside the last hoofprint, his breath leaving fog in the morning light. He could smell it now. Smoke, faint but clinging to the wind like oil. A camp nearby. Whoever was following Marianne had made their fire, but not too close. He crouched low, pressed a gloved hand into the track, then brought his fingers to his nose. Tobacco. Cheap. Strong. Not the Reverend's, but someone hired. When he returned to the cave above the ravine, the fire was low but steady. Marianne sat near the edge of the light, wrapped in the buffalo hide, eyes red from lack of sleep. She held the pistol like she didn't trust it, but trusted him slightly more. He knelt, poured water into a tin cup, and handed it to her. She took it, murmuring thanks. They're close, he said simply. She didn't flinch. He added more wood to the fire, watched the sparks rise. Then he turned to her. You said you knew me. Marianne nodded slowly. I was just a child, maybe 7 or 8. But I remember the mission school. They took me after my mother died of fever. There was another child there, Comanche but younger than the others. Wild, quiet. He said nothing. They called you by a white name, but your mother came sometimes. She wore blue beads in her braid. She called you Dakota. His jaw tensed at the memory. Sharp, sudden. Beads the color of river stones, a voice humming at night. She had died the same winter the soldiers came. I remembered you because you gave me something once, a feather. You said it would keep nightmares away. He blinked slowly, eyes fixed on the fire. You were the only kind one, she said. He stood up and paced the small space, restless. The connection was real, too real, and dangerous. She reached under the hide and pulled something from a leather pouch tied around her thigh. I kept it. It was cracked, faded, but it was there, a feather and still black and white. I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, she said quietly. I've been running for so long, I forgot what it felt like to stop. Dakota didn't respond. He reached for the folded photograph again, the one he'd taken from her dress. He studied it under the flickering firelight. His eyes moved from the preacher's stern face to the Comanche woman beside him. Then finally to the background where the blurred boy stood, half hidden in shadow. That boy was him. Why do you have this? He asked. Marianne took a breath, slow and shaky. The woman in the photo, your mother. Her name was Wapuna. She worked in our house for almost a year. My father didn't tell anyone where she came from. Dakota's fingers tightened around the photo. She left one day without warning, and when she did, she took a child with her, a boy. My father said the boy wasn't his, but he lied about everything. Dakota stared at her, searching for some angle, some flaw in her truth. My father was the first man to hurt me, she whispered, but not the last. She looked at him, eyes glassy with heat. Do you think it's possible that we were meant to find each other again? Dakota turned his face away. Outside, the sound of snow slipping from a branch broke the silence. Then came something sharper, the snap of a twig. He motioned to her without a word. Get down. She slid low against the back wall of the cave, pistol in hand. Her breath came fast, shallow. Dakota crouched near the entrance. He listened. Silence. Then, bootsteps. One set, maybe two. Then a voice, low, but smug. She's close, I can smell her. A second man replied. Reverend said she'd be with the Injun. Dakota's eyes darkened. They were here. He waited until the voices moved past the cave's mouth, deeper into the canyon. Amateurs. Too loud. Too confident. He looked back at Marianne. She met his gaze, nodding once. He moved out into the cold, silent as the wind. An hour later, he returned. His coat was dusted with snow. His hands carried a hunting knife. Clean. But something had changed in his face. They're scouting, he said. Not attacking. Marianne whispered. They want to find out where I'm hiding. Then bring him. The Reverend. She nodded. Dakota sat down beside the fire, then reached inside his coat and pulled something wrapped in hide. A locket. Marianne's breath caught. That was mine, she said, reaching out with shaking hands. She opened it and froze. Inside were two things, a curl of hair and a scrap of paper with one word written on it, Dakota. Her eyes widened. He knew it was you. Dakota's expression didn't change, but something inside him had shifted. He's not coming for you, he said. He's coming for me. She stared at him. Then, what do we do? He didn't answer. He reached for the rifle, stood up, and then listened again to the wind. The cold had sharpened overnight. By morning, the sky was pewter, the kind of gray that made every sound carry farther. Marianne stood near the cave's mouth, watching the wind scrape snow off the rocks in soft, cruel gusts. Her belly ached low and dull, like something stirring beneath ice. She'd been quiet since he handed her the locket. Dakota hadn't slept. He crouched by the dying fire, sharpening his knife with a slow, even rhythm. The steel whispered against the stone, each stroke precise, each motion practiced. His rifle leaned against the cave wall, loaded. They'll come today, he said. Marianne turned toward him. How do you know? Dakota looked up, eyes unreadable. They're tired of waiting. She sat down across from him, drawing the hide tighter around her. They won't let me go. They're not here for you anymore. She stared at him, lips pressed tight. Dakota spoke again. He wants blood. He wants shame. That's what makes men like him feel holy. Marianne's hand settled on her belly. And the baby? Dakota stood, paced to the mouth of the cave. The valley below stretched white and empty. But it lied. They'll come from the ridge, he said. Too open to shoot from down below. They'll want to see our faces when they kill us. By midday, she could barely sit still. Her back ached. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking. Every sound outside made her heart rise into her throat. Dakota prepared the cave for siege. He'd already moved her to a second hollow behind the main wall, barely big enough to crawl into. He stacked stones by the entrance, laid snares near the trail, loaded a second pistol and set it beside her. You can shoot? He asked. Enough. He nodded once. They said nothing more. The wind dropped to almost nothing by late afternoon. That silence was worse than noise. It meant someone else was listening too. Then, a crack. Snow under a boot. Dakota dropped to a crouch. Another step. Then a voice, calm, loud, theatrical. "Dakota Blackbird, son of a harlot and a heathen." Dakota didn't answer. The voice continued. "You've taken something that belongs to me. A woman and a child. Both touched by the devil. Both lost in sin." Marianne's blood went cold. She knew that voice. Reverend Elijah Graves stepped into view on the ridge above, dressed in black, a long rifle across his chest. His silver cross swung in the wind. Behind him, 3 riders fanned out, men she didn't recognize, faces hard and flat. One of them carried a lantern. Another had a rope coiled at his side. Dakota stepped into view slowly, rifle at the ready. "You came for a sermon?" he asked. The Reverend grinned. "I came for vengeance. The Lord says vengeance is mine, but I'm his hand." Dakota didn't move. Elijah raised the rifle and fired. The shot ripped through the air, struck stone inches from Dakota's head. Marianne flinched in the cave. "Next one won't miss," the Reverend called. Dakota stepped behind a rock outcropping. "Then shoot." Elijah laughed once. "I want the girl alive, the child too. I have plans for them." Marianne couldn't breathe. Her fingers curled around the pistol Dakota had given her. Elijah shouted again. "She belongs to me. She was mine by oath. And what's inside her? That child's got no name, no father, no soul." Dakota's voice was cold. "It has my name." Silence, then a bitter laugh. "I knew it," Elijah said. "You don't even remember, do you? That winter, that night? You were just a filthy little stray." Marianne's heart pounded. She leaned closer to the edge of the wall, listening. "You broke into my house," Elijah said, "after we took your mother. You left her dead in the snow, and you came back for revenge. But you were too slow. You didn't even know what you did. You think that woman beside you is pure. She's been yours for longer than either of you remember." Dakota didn't speak. He stared at the preacher with eyes full of fire and silence. Marianne whispered to herself, "He's lying." But something in her voice betrayed doubt. "Tell me, Dakota," the preacher shouted, "if that child is truly yours, will you raise him like a savage? Like your father raised you?" A shot rang out. This time, it didn't miss. The rider holding the rope dropped. The others scattered behind rocks. Dakota ducked low, reloading quickly. Marianne gasped and held her belly, the pain sharp now, sudden. She called out, but the cave swallowed her voice. Her body tensed. Something was wrong. "Dakota," she whispered, "something's wrong." He turned back toward the cave, torn. Gunfire cracked the air again. A bullet struck inches above her hiding place. Dakota shouted something in Comanche and fired twice, driving the attackers back. Marianne curled into herself. The pain rippled through her. Blood. Outside, the preacher screamed again. "She'll die with you, Blackbird. Both of you, damned and forgotten." Dakota gritted his teeth. He knew he couldn't hold this ridge forever. He looked between the rifle, the woman, and the child that hadn't yet breathed. If it were you standing there, with one bullet left, and the ones you loved bleeding behind you, what would you do? The first scream didn't come from Marianne. It came from one of the hired guns. Dakota's final shot split the ridge wide open with noise. The man dropped, rolling off a ledge and landing hard on the rocks below, his lantern bursting into flame beside him. The echo swallowed the valley. The others froze, too far from their leader to act without orders, too close to Dakota's fury to retreat without shame. Dakota didn't wait for them to decide. He sprinted across the open ground, low and fast, switching to his knife the moment his rifle was empty. The blade gleamed as he reached the second man, struck clean, fast, silent. The man collapsed without a word, blood melting into the snow. The third turned and fled. Dakota didn't chase. He turned toward the one still standing, the one who had lit this fire from the beginning, Elijah Graves. The preacher stood his ground, but his face had changed. Gone was the righteous mask, replaced now by something harder to name, fear trying not to look like fear. "You think this is justice?" Elijah shouted. "You murder men and call yourself a savior?" Dakota said nothing. He moved forward one step at a time. The wind howled between them. Behind the rocks, Marianne's cries echoed. Raw, involuntary, terrifying. She was in labor. Elijah raised his rifle again. Dakota moved before the man's finger reached the trigger. He ducked, rolled, surged forward. His shoulder slammed into the preacher's ribs, and both men crashed to the frozen ground. The rifle fired wide, then skittered out of reach. Dakota pinned Elijah down. The man clawed at his face, screaming verses, curses, nothing that made sense. "The Lord will burn you. Burn your blood and bones." Dakota didn't flinch. "You already tried." He struck once. The preacher's head hit the rock hard. Stillness. Dakota stood over him, breathing like a hunted animal. He didn't strike again. He turned, heart pounding, and ran back toward the cave. Marianne was curled in the back hollow, her hands slick with blood and trembling. Her eyes flicked toward him, wide with panic. "It's coming," she whispered. "I can't stop it. I can't." Dakota knelt beside her. "You won't need to stop it," he said. "Just breathe." She gripped his hand with surprising strength. He saw the fear in her face, not fear of dying, fear of doing it alone. He remembered his mother's face when his brother was born. He remembered the scream that shook their lodge, and the silence after. He pushed that memory down and focused on this one. Marianne bit her lip, closed her eyes, and screamed. The hours dragged, but he didn't leave her side. Not when the cries turned hoarse. Not when her nails dug into his wrist. Not when the blood came faster than he expected. And then, a cry. Weak, wet, alive. The child lay in his hands, slippery and small, breathing through its first scream. He wrapped the boy in cloth torn from his own shirt, pressed him to Marianne's chest. She cried then, not in pain, but in release. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft, relentless. They buried Elijah before nightfall, beside the river that had tried to take her. Dakota marked the grave with a flat stone, not for honor, but so the land would remember where he fell. Marianne stood nearby, holding the child. Her hair hung loose, her face pale, but calm. "You didn't kill him," she said softly. "No." "Why not?" Dakota stared at the stone for a long time. "Because he wanted me to." They returned to the cave. For the first time in days, it felt warm. Dakota sat by the fire, carving a small piece of wood. Marianne fed the baby, humming something broken but sweet. Outside, the snow buried old tracks and made room for new ones. The river flowed slower now, swollen with melting snow, its surface calm, like breath finally exhaled. The ice had broken days earlier, leaving behind a muddy trail of branches and bone-colored stones. Where reverend graves had once stood and screamed judgment, now only birds nested in the cottonwoods, their calls sharp and clear. Dakota stood near the edge watching the current, arms folded across his chest. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, revealing the fading bruises from that night. His eyes weren't hard anymore. They were still, like the surface of the water. Behind him, the child cried once, sharp and healthy. Marianne's voice followed, soft and patient. "He's hungry again, that's all." Dakota didn't turn. "I left more wood near the door," he said. She appeared beside him a moment later, baby wrapped tight to her chest in a sling made from one of Dakota's old shirts. Her cheeks were pink from the cold. Her steps were stronger now. "You never told me what the name means," she said. He looked at her, one brow raised. "Dakota." He was silent for a moment, then said, "Friend to everyone." Marianne smiled. "That doesn't sound like the man I met." His mouth twitched. "It didn't used to." They stood like that for a while, shoulder to shoulder, watching the river slide past. Back at the cave, now more cabin than shelter, The fire was strong and the walls had been lined with pine branches and hides. The wind no longer pierced straight through. A place made to last, not just to survive. Marianne sat near the hearth, the baby pressed close. She rocked gently, humming something wordless. Dakota sat across from her, carving again. Another feather, shaped from ashwood, thin and perfect. He handed it to her without speaking. She took it like it mattered. Later that night, as snow whispered against the roof, she asked the question she hadn't dared before. "Do you think it's wrong that I feel peace here?" Dakota didn't answer right away. He poured water into a tin cup, handed it to her, sat down close enough that their knees touched. "You came here to die," he said, "but you lived." She nodded, eyes distant. "You didn't bring danger," he added. "He brought it." She looked at the fire, then at the child. "I don't think I ever believed I'd be a mother. Not like this, not safe." Dakota's hand moved gently to rest on the child's head. "He's yours," she whispered. His eyes flicked to her. "He's ours." Outside, the snow stopped. Dakota stepped out, alone. The moonlight shimmered off every surface, turning the world silver and soft. He listened. Not for footsteps, not for danger. Just the quiet. For the first time in many years, he didn't expect an arrow in the dark. No pistol cocked behind a door. No names whispered like curses. Only wind, and the faint crackle of fire behind him. Marianne watched him through the doorway, her heart full of something she didn't have a name for. Gratitude, longing, maybe just the slow realization that she didn't have to run anymore. The baby stirred, then settled again. She whispered, "You'll never know what you saved me from." And still the river moved, and still the fire burned. By spring, the snow had given up. The river ran full and fast again, its voice louder now, confident, like it knew what it carried mattered. Dakota rode into Bitter Creek at first light. The town was quieter than before. New hands had come through. The sheriff had been replaced after the fire that claimed the old chapel. The burned cross still leaned against the side of the jailhouse, untouched, like the town didn't know what to do with it. He dismounted in front of the general store, tied his mare, and walked inside. Conversations paused. A few turned to look, then looked away. No one said his name. He bought what he needed: flour, salt, fabric, a soft blue blanket, paid in coin, spoke only twice. When he left, someone near the back whispered, "Was that him?" No one answered. They all knew. Back at the cabin, Marianne was drying herbs by the doorframe, sleeves rolled up, hair tied back. She'd built a cradle from cedar branches and old rope. The baby slept inside, hands curled, face peaceful. When Dakota stepped into the clearing, she smiled before he even spoke. "You didn't stay long. Long enough." He handed her the bundle. She opened it, ran her fingers over the blanket. "I've never owned anything this soft," she whispered. Dakota knelt beside the cradle, brushing a hand over the baby's chest. The child stirred, then sighed. "He looks more like you every day," she said. Dakota tilted his head. "You sure that's a good thing?" She grinned. "You're learning to joke." He didn't reply, but his lips tugged upward, just enough. They lived quietly after that, built up the cabin, grew vegetables near the stream, taught the child to laugh before he learned to walk. Marianne read aloud from the old Bible they found beneath Elijah's coat, but she skipped the angry parts. Instead, she turned to the pages about grace, about peace. Dakota carved feathers, arrows, small animals for the boy to play with. He spoke to him in Comanche, slow, patient. Sometimes he caught Marianne listening with her eyes closed, mouthing the sounds. One night, under the stars, she asked him, "Do you think your people would have accepted me?" He took a long time to answer. "They wouldn't have had to," he said. "You would have been mine." In time, the past became like dust on the wind. Still there, but no longer heavy. Just something the light passed through. The child's first steps were by the river, Dakota stood nearby, arms folded, watching him waddle from rock to tree. The boy pointed toward the sky. "Bird!" Above them, a hawk turned slow circles. Dakota followed it with his eyes. The same bird had been flying since the snow melted. Maybe not the same hawk, but maybe it was. Mary Ann came down the trail, laughing softly. "He sees it every morning." "He's watching," Dakota said. "Who?" "The hawk." She took his hand without hesitation, then let it watch. They stood like that, a woman once broken, now whole, a warrior once hollow, now full, and a boy born in the dead of winter, alive and strong beneath a blue sky. No guns, no blood, just wind and sun and a future worth staying for. Some folks in Bitter Creek still whispered about the Comanche who took in a white woman. Some said it was a lie. Others said it was a legend. Few swore they'd seen them riding north, man, woman, and child, heading where no one could follow. But no one ever rode up that canyon again, and the hawk kept flying. If you felt something in your chest as this story unfolded, if Dakota and Mary Ann's journey meant something to you, take 1 second to subscribe to Wild West Love Legends. More stories like this are riding your way, and if you're watching on your TV, grab your phone, search Wild West Love Legends, and hit that subscribe button now. Thanks for riding with us. We'll see you on the next trail.